Welcome again to this week's episode of LDN ONT TV here on Rogers TV London. I am your host, Bronagh Morgan, and it is my pleasure today to welcome to our show Member of Provincial Parliament for Guelph and the leader of the Ontario Green Party and a friend of mine. His name is Mike Schreiner. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, Bronagh, it's a real pleasure to be on.
It's awesome that you could be with us today. I think you're joining us from Guelph today.
I am. Yes, I'm up in my office in Guelph and looking forward to Halloween in a few days and hoping the kids are going to have a fun, safe evening.
Yeah, it was real treat, I think, last year for the kids after such a weird year to have that little bit of normalcy. So I'm hoping for some good weather and, a little more, safe outdoor community fun this year as well. Mike, you and I have known each other, I think, maybe about 5 years now, but you joined the Green Party, I think, and became the leader in the years that I wasn't so involved with the Green Party when I was having my kids and, kind of focused on other things. So I spent a little time today doing a little backgrounder on you on Wikipedia. So some of the things I didn't know about you, I knew that you were originally from America, but I didn't know that you grew up on a farm in Kansas. And also that your background in business had a lot to do with food production, sustainable food production, and making sure that healthy local food got into the hands of people that you were living with in the community. So can you talk to me a little bit about the trip from Kansas to Canada and from business to politics?
Yeah, sure, Bronagh. So, I'm a farm boy from the middle of nowhere in rural Western Kansas. My parents, we raised cattle and had a grain farm, and thought something would be dissimilar from a lot of farms in southwestern Ontario. And I moved to Canada for love and fell in love with Ontario. And it's just so lucky. I feel like it's the best province. I think Guelph's the best community, best province, the best country. And I can always tell you, especially when I'm debating healthcare policy with people, I always say, you know what, Canadians don't know how lucky we are and how well we have it. And I just think Ontario is a beautiful place to live and raise a family. And I've always been interested in politics. Anybody who grew up on a farm, especially a large grain farm, will know that driving around a big circle on a tractor all afternoon can get a bit boring, especially because my dad would never let me have the tractor with a radio or a cab on it. And so I used to give political speeches as I was driving around in the tractor with nothing better to do. So maybe my interest in politics started when I was young. But in my late 20s, I was a bit disillusioned with politics, to be quite honest. I felt like money had too big of a role to play in politics, and I wasn't sure that the status quo parties really addressed the issues I was most concerned about. So I decided to become an entrepreneur. And one of my big projects was to help build more local sustainable food systems. So I've started a couple of businesses doing that in and around the Guelph area, and also had the opportunity to start a nonprofit organization with a friend of mine to help get more local sustainable food into restaurants, public institutions like universities, healthcare, long-term care, et cetera, as well as in retail stores. And so I guess maybe, you can't take the farm boy out of me. And so my interest in local sustainable food, persists to this day while I'm in politics. And I decided to get involved in politics primarily because I felt like we're facing a climate and ecological crisis. And I felt like the political system really wasn't adequately dealing with it, and in some cases even talking about it, or in some cases denying that was a challenge we faced. And so I was trying to figure out which political party would best represent those views. And, in the early 2000s, I was watching the rise of the Green Party, and I thought the entrepreneur in me that likes to start businesses and organizations wanted to be part of, a new startup political party that really addressed the three issues I'm most concerned about: the climate crisis, social justice, and rising levels of income inequality and racial inequality, and just improving our democracy. And so that's why I chose the Green Party. And I started out as a volunteer and, ended up becoming the leader and ultimately the first Green MPP in Ontario history.
And that was really historical night back in 2018. I'm sure, obviously, the Green Party of Ontario works a lot with the Green Party of Canada, so it must have been a really historical night for you. I guess about a month or so ago, when the first Ontario federal Green politician was elected as well. And I think you worked a little bit on the Mike Morris campaign as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm proud to say I was one of the people who helped talk Mike Morris into running in 2019, and he ran a fantastic campaign in 2019. So it was really rewarding to see the voters in Kitchener Centre really put their trust in Mike for a breakthrough in the most recent federal election. And Mike's somebody I've known for, oh my gosh, well over a decade. When he was working with Sustainable Waterloo, and the two of us were working on a lot of issues about, how can we create jobs, build profitable businesses while addressing the climate crisis at the same time. And I think Mike's going to be a strong voice for Kitchener Centre. And I think it also reflects the fact that, we have a little bit of a growing base of green support here in the Guelph, Waterloo region, Kitchener. Let's spread that out into southwestern Ontario, because I think this part of the province is perfectly poised to be a leader in the emerging green economy, and can lead the way in creating new career opportunities, better jobs for people, while at the same time addressing the climate crisis that we're facing.
Really very exciting times, I think, for all of us here in southwestern Ontario. Talk to me a little bit about, how you, as our first Green Party of Ontario elected official in Toronto, have been able to, bring some kind of, a new and a fresh voice to Ontario politics in the last couple of years since you've been elected.
Yeah, I think one of my top priorities, and a promise I really made to my constituents here in Guelph, was to do politics differently. And what I meant by that was, hold the government accountable. And I can tell you there are a lot of things that the Ford government's done that I've strongly opposed, but to also work across party lines whenever I have the opportunity to do so in ways that, reflect the values of my constituents and improve people's lives. And I'll give you a concrete example of that. I was very proud. I co-sponsored a bill to improve life for electric vehicle drivers with a member of the Conservative caucus, and actually Lauren Coe, who's the chief government whip. And, there were a lot of people surprised by that. They're like, well, how can you work with this party that's done so many things to, move Ontario backwards when it comes to addressing the climate crisis? And, my response to that was, well, I can chew gum and walk at the same time. I can be critical of the Ford government on the things that, they do that I'm opposed to. But when I have an opportunity to work with government members to pass legislation that's going to make people's lives better, I'm going to do it. And so I was really proud that that's the first Green sponsored bill in Ontario history to pass. And it's not very often that a private member's bill, passes that provides substantive legislation like that. And so that's been my approach on a number of issues. And I've also tried to engage and mobilize citizens and citizen participation in government. And one quick example of that was, I remember in the first sitting in the fall of 2018, my first sitting in the legislature, and the government introduced a bill that would have opened the Greenbelt for development. And the next day, I asked a question in question period, started mobilizing opposition to the bill, was glad to see other opposition parties start to speak out on it. And ultimately, the government backtracked on that bill and made a commitment to protecting the Greenbelt. And I think when you do politics differently, you can get things like that accomplished.
That's amazing. Great success story. And I'm looking forward to hearing some more success stories like that from you after we take a short break. Quickly, though, is there anything that has been maybe a little bit frustrating about being on your own there?
I think the hardest part about being one Green MPP is that oftentimes I need to be in 5 or 6 places at the same time. And so I think a lot of people would recognize it. I'm one of the hardest working MPPs because I'm the critic for everything, every little event at Queen's Park. I'm there. I make sure the Greens are represented. And so it makes for long, intense days, but I love the work. And I'm just grateful people in Guelph have really trusted me to be their voice at Queen's Park.
That's awesome to hear. And I'm sure you have some wonderful strategies to share with our viewers as well about how you can sustain not only the planet, but also yourself through all of that hard work. So we'll just have to take a little short break and we'll be back with more from Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Ontario Green Party, after our break. Stay with us. Welcome back to LDN ONT TV. I'm your host, Bronagh, and I've been speaking with Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario and MPP for Guelph. Welcome back, Mike. We were just chatting a little bit about some of the successes and also some of the challenges of being not a party of one, but a caucus of one in the legislature at Queen's Park. Can we talk a little bit more, diving into, the platform that got you elected, the thing that got you in the door that resounded with a lot of people, talking about sustainability, talking about green retrofits for homes, that was one of them, but also talking about how we need to be moving our healthcare system, the focus from onto prevention. So really having a kind of a less of a focus on sickness care and more of a focus on prevention. How would implementing those kind of policies made maybe the last year and a half of our lives a little bit different here in Ontario?
Yeah, well, the Green Party has always been strong advocates of investing in public health, health promotion, and preventing illness. And some of that's addressing things that some people would call social determinants of health. So making sure people have access to affordable housing, making sure people have access to healthy local food, making sure we're addressing issues around poverty alleviation and community connections. And one of the things that I was strongly opposing that the Ford government was doing prior to COVID were just their significant cutbacks in funding for public health. And people, I don't think, realize how vital public health is to promoting health and wellness. And then the COVID hit, and suddenly we saw, oh my gosh, how important public health is. And I think the province's response to the pandemic could have been faster, stronger, if we'd had the kind of resources and capacity of public health we need. And so I'm hoping that one of the lessons learned from the pandemic is just how important it is to invest in public health, primary health care, health promotion, wellness, illness prevention. We need that kind of investment in promoting health and preventing illness and promoting wellness in our communities.
Makes a lot of sense. Now we have an election coming up, though, in the spring, I believe, of 2022. So, recognizing that prevention is hard to quantify, and sometimes it can be a hard sell. How can we focus voters' attention during the campaign away from maybe short-term issues onto these really important big picture ideas and long-term thinking? How do we kind of translate that into a political campaign that actually works well for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as we think about the upcoming provincial election, I think one of the things that I'm really challenging the other parties is, let's keep focused on getting people through COVID. I mean, you've probably seen attack ads from the sort of mainstream status quo parties already. And I'm saying, hey, we're in the fourth wave of a pandemic. Let's focus on helping people get through this pandemic and get our economy back on track again. When it comes to the actual issues that, are likely to be talked about in the next election, one of the biggest ones, I think, if you want to talk about prevention, is addressing the climate crisis. And the fact that we're already experiencing the effects of changing climate. I mean, the heat deaths we saw on the West Coast this summer, the wildfires we're seeing in British Columbia, in Northern Ontario. I mean, 6 First Nations communities had to be evacuated. I mean, Toronto for a few days had the worst air quality in the world because of all the smoke in the air. We've seen extreme flooding events, et cetera. And so the costs associated with the climate crisis are only going to go up. And that's exactly why we need bold, urgent action. And, that'll be an issue that we'll be pushing hard. And I think it's not only an imperative to preventing the worst of the climate crisis, but it's also an economic imperative. If you look at where global investment is going, it's going into clean economy, clean technologies, clean innovations. And so we're going to be putting forward aggressive action to prevent and mitigate the worst of the climate crisis, but also to help Ontario be a leader in the new economy so we can create new careers, new businesses, and better jobs for people.
I think that, on our broadcast, we normally end with a young person. So somebody that fits into the youth demographic. And I think that's the kind of message that really can resound with people who, are going to have to live with the consequences of the decisions that people, my age, your age, and older than us are making every day in Queen's Park and, and like different businesses and institutions. Maybe what kind of hope do you have, and what kind of hope can you share with our young people for, where our province is going and how they can get involved and help?
Well, you know what? I have a lot of hope and inspiration I receive comes from young people. I mean, I just look at the Fridays for Future, climate strikes, just the whole youth global climate movement inspired by Greta Thunberg. And that inspires me and gives me hope. And so what I want to do is bring those young voices to Queen's Park. I'd really highly recommend young people considering running for office. And certainly the Green Party, we're in the process of recruiting candidates right now, but to also demand that elected officials and people who are running for office bring forward a credible, bold, doable, practical action that will address the climate crisis and that understands the urgency of reducing climate pollution, and knowing that by doing that, we're actually going to improve air quality, improve water quality, improve the quality of life. One of the issues I'm talking about right now that I know is top of mind for so many people is housing affordability. So how do we address the housing affordability crisis and the climate crisis at the same time? Because right now, so many people are having to move so far away from where they work just to afford a place to live, which then means they have to commute more, which takes away time from family and community, increases climate pollution. That's the number one source of climate pollution is transportation. So let's build connected, affordable communities where people can live, work, shop, and play, which will reduce the need to commute, will mean more time for family and community, and will significantly reduce climate pollution at the same time. So we can address multiple issues like housing affordability and climate at the same time.
So finding time for family, for community, especially for somebody like you who has obviously 2 residences now, looking after a political party, being the one voice for the Green Party, personally, how are you managing as a, first term MPP and even, in these ridiculous times, because you didn't obviously get a normal term, you like this is the COVID era now. So how personally have you been able to manage and keep it all together?
Well, I mean, first of all, I love the work that I do. And so much of the time that I'm working, it doesn't really feel like work because it's the kind of things I would do volunteering for my community, because I do a lot of volunteer work as well. But you still at the same time have to balance that with family. And I know that's hard for any politician from any political party. And so I really make sure I carve out time. So for example, on Thanksgiving morning, I'm lucky enough here in Guelph to live along the Speed River. My daughter and I went paddling together on the river, and just taking the time to do things like that with your family, I think is really important for anybody in any career, but I think especially for politicians when we're traveling so much between, Queen's Park and Guelph in my case, or if I was, our federal members between Ottawa and your home community. And it's just making sure you find that balance to have time for family and community.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the river too, because we have such beautiful public spaces here in Ontario, and that's a really good way to keep yourself grounded. And I think, showing leadership in that way, I guess that's what being a politician is all about, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it also reminds me of, When I think about, fighting to protect water in my community, for example, or to protect the places we love, I am stronger in those efforts when I take the time to go enjoy the places I love as well.
It's been just a pleasure talking to you, Mike. I encourage everybody to, take their time to go visit our beautiful Thames River here as well. Take some time to get involved in politics. And I'm glad that you took the time to join us today, Mike, and our viewers as well. We have to take another short break. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. We're going to be back with more LDN ONT TV in just a moment. Welcome back to LDN ONT TV. I'm your host, Bronagh, and now I'm joined by Clara James. Clara, you may recall, was our youth panelist on our federal election night broadcast. We received so many great comments about Clara's perspective. We're happy to welcome her back. Today, we've been talking, Clara, a lot about provincial politics. And so I'd love to hear some perspectives from you on the state of provincial politics and maybe some, ideas about what you're hoping for or what's coming up in the election that is happening in 22.
For sure. So thank you for having me again. It was really fun the last time. So I'm excited to offer some perspectives for a few minutes. So I guess I'll start off with, the general attitude I feel like most Ontarians are going to have moving into this provincial election. I think there's been definitely with the pandemic, a lot of negative attitudes towards our current Premier Doug Ford. So I don't think overall anything will really change in terms of leadership, but I do think the approaches are going to change, kind of like what I touched on with the federal election. I do think that the NDP will form the official opposition again, as we saw before. In terms of where we're going to see some slight changes, I definitely think in some of the more urban centers, we're going to see definitely more of a battle between the NDP and Liberals to retain voters. I think that it says a lot about kind of how important this election is for Ontario, because we've already seen the PCs and the NDPs put out some media campaign ads before the deadline of when, their budgeting is going to have to really come into play and how they're going to have to utilize, their rather meager budgets to actually gain the votes for Ontarians. I also think that once again, the promises of Doug Ford being a leader are going to be resonated with a lot of like the blue collar workers seen in rural areas. I don't think he's going to lose much support there. And I do think that we're going to see similar trends for those who do go out and vote in the provincial election, what they voted for in the federal election. I think that this election will be a lot different because people have been isolated. I think I made that point for the federal election. And I do definitely think that we will see a big play on how we're going to restore the economy for Ontarians, how we're going to create more affordable job markets that are sustainable, and how we're going to see also affordable housing being a number one priority, because so many Ontarians have been left with either less work than before or they haven't returned to work at all. So I think those will be big topics of conversation, and we won't really see much change other than maybe a bit more battle between the NDP and PC for some of the bigger areas of Ontario.
As somebody who kind of is within the youth demographic, is there anything that really didn't get addressed in the federal election that you would really like to see addressed in this election coming up?
I would definitely say that something that I think that a lot of youth are going to be listening to is how we're going to create an economy that we can actually survive in and build families in or get a house in and have a job that's actually going to last. I also think that one really important takeaway for any politician listening is definitely going to be addressing the environmental crisis, because we have a lot of really good fertile lands here, especially for agriculture, and a lot of it's being eaten up by new developments. So I do definitely think that that's something that needs to be addressed, and it should be recognized for sure.
Absolutely. I love that perspective. And that's perfect for wrapping up the show, where we thank very much Clara James for being with us, as well as Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario. And thank you, viewers, for being with us on this episode of LDN ONT TV. We hope you'll join us again next week. Have a great week.